Okay, welcome back for another episode of the Unplanned show, where we bring on guests and talk about lots of different topics as it relates to unplanned work and how we manage that in the sort of our highly digitized worlds. Today with me, I've got three guests, and they are going to be taking me through some learnings that they've had and actually building with large language models. So generative AI has been a really hot topic in the last couple of months. Large language models have been one of the underlying technologies that are powering a lot of these capabilities. And and so, with some of the recent announcements, PagerDuty bringing some new capabilities into their products based on large language models and using generative AI, seemed like a good time to kind of dig in and find out from the team what have they learned along the way. And so I've got with me Leor Engel, if you want to say hello and share with us, like, are you more of a coffee person or a tea person?
Ooh, hard questions. Yeah, hi, I'm Leor Engel. I'm a senior engineering manager here at PagerDuty, and I work with some of our product teams. And I am definitely a coffee person.
Okay. I'm hearing a strong opinion there, strongly held. Next, we've got Everaldo Aguiar. You want to introduce yourself? And again, coffee or tea preference?
Everyone. I'm a senior manager on the data science team at PagerDuty. I manage both the data science and the data ecosystems team here. And I'm originally from Brazil. So if I say that I'm a tea person, I think I'll have like jail time back home. I am definitely a coffee person as well.
Okay. Yeah, no, I really like, we all want to keep you safe. And so stick with the coffee story. I totally get it. And then finally, last but not least, Ben Biegelman. Can you give yourself a quick intro and where do you come in on the coffee tea preference?
Yeah, I'm a senior product manager based in Lisbon, working for this company almost 1.5 years. And my team is overlooking services and status updates and a few other features. And in status update, we just released a generative AI feature a few weeks back. Yeah, and coffee or tea, for me, it's tea.
Okay. No, I like how we're gonna mix it up here. I'm currently sipping on a little bit of tea. I will drink tea or coffee. Um, just in case anyone was wondering, not that they were. But so here we are. Okay. So I know the LLMs and those are the hot topics, but I actually want to start with the problem, right? Like, because we can often find ourselves in tech with sort of like solutions in search of a problem. And so I kind of want to ground this conversation in what's the actual underlying problem to solve, like, so that all of this powerful and great technology is at the end of the day actually helping and serving a purpose. So Ben, I'm going to start with you. Just, you're kind of on the product side of things. So how did you start thinking about what problem do we want to solve?
Yeah. First of all, I like your approach. So as a product manager, I always say, stay on the problem and don't fall in love with the solution, right? Because a solution could be a specific technology, but the customer actually don't care about the technology. And it's much easier to start products or even companies when you start with the problem. And I shared before, we released a new feature, status updates. And we're following problem there. There's an incident going, maybe let's say web shop is down and it's not working anymore, or Netflix can't stream anymore, something is happening. And you have a team of first responders who wants to fix this problem pretty quick. They have the problem, first of all, they have to fix it as soon as possible, but they have also to update their stakeholders. That could be other team members, that could be the C-level, that could be customers, right? And for them, because it's a very stressed moment, they are in this incident, and one part of the brain is thinking about how to fix it, on the other side they have to write it. And also, there's not just one person who's fixing it, there are multiple people fixing it. And this conversation happens most of the time in Slack channels today, right? In MS Team or Slack channel, or it could be also on PagerDuty or Notes. People are sending the message back and forth. And this person who is responsible to deliver this update to the stakeholder, this very stress moment, has to go to all the conversation and try to understand what's going on, what they are working on. Maybe I'm not technical enough. Maybe I don't know what the error 500 means or whatever, right? And that's where we implemented generative AI, which can help to read this message, this conversation of the team, and create a summary out of that. So the person who has to send this out just has to review it and give it an approval and send it out, and it saves a lot of time. We know from customers they have up to 3 people on call 24/7 to just update stakeholders. And we think with this solution, we can actually also bring this down to just 1 person reviewing it.
Okay, well, in that, that sort of example there, right? Just imagining 3 people during an incident that are dedicated to writing status updates, which, as you described, you're in the fog of war. It's a complex environment, especially as teams are increasingly distributed.
Right.
But yeah, if you can reduce that to 1, you're freeing up your teams to work on other things. You're reducing the number of people who are getting interrupted and pulled in to into an incident. So that's kind of the starting point. Like, where did you go from there in terms of what was the next sort of question you had to ask? And maybe this is kind of getting into some of the early technology exploration. I won't say decisions, but if that's the problem you're trying to solve, what happened next?
For me as a product manager, it's then the next thing is like user experience, right? How should a user use it? How simple is it? Is it just 1 click? Does it have multiple clicks? What knowledge does the user have, right? Are they very technically, or do they have not only, but do they have a more business context instead of a technical context? And that's where we are looking at. For example, when we started playing around with generative AI, one of the first ideas was, should it be just an open window into something like ChatGPT, right? Where you can ask all kinds of questions and solve all kinds of use cases by saying, here is a text field, and ask every question, and you will get every kind of answer. But then we realized also pretty quick, we should actually do this more guided, and we tended more to say, hey, it's just a 1-click solution. That means that what we are building here solves only this 1 use case at that moment. We will build other solutions for other cases, but this solves only this 1 thing, and gives a lot of usability to our customers, because now it's just 1 click, and we communicate with the AI model the best way so the customer can get the best result.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because it's also, you're talking about sort of embedding a lot of the context as opposed to those open, like, here's a chat window, just put in whatever, where that's interesting. But you have to set up so much context in that question. This is kind of a lot of the sort of prompt engineering that you hear about, where, even like with ChatGPT, where it's like, answer this as if you're an expert in, whatever. And then you get actually a different result. Like, so just thinking about how much context you already have in PagerDuty, that makes a lot of sense versus like, wow, just a wide open window. So then as you start to think about the technology, that how do you build that? How do you make use of that context and avoid that like wide open window that doesn't add as much value? Maybe this is a question for you, Lior.
Yeah, definitely. And, starting with, I think Ben did a pretty good job of sort of explaining the customer problem. And then, obviously, if you step back and you say, what would be ideal? Well, like Ben said, you click a button and it just works, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's obviously the sort of like holy grail customer experience. You push a button, you don't have to know anything else. It's magic. It produces a very credible update that you could ideally just push send. Now, in reality, we all know that, I think, lots of people have experience by now, experimenting with ChatGPT, the consumer application, and they know that it's very powerful, but it also, makes stuff up sometimes, right? They call this hallucinations, right? And so one of the core philosophies that we've developed is the idea that, because customer trust is basically PagerDuty's number one priority, and that comes in the form of reliability, quality, security, all those things. And so, what becomes really critical in these features is that there's a human in the loop, right? So we of course want to generate something that's as accurate as possible, but also the customer experience allows the user to, read it, refine it, change it, update it, even correct it if necessary before hitting send. And so, if you've done a lot of writing, you're familiar with the sort of writer's block problem, right? You stare at a blank page and you're like, what do I write? Now compound to that you got pulled into this major incident, because the other thing that's important about status updates is that you're not really going to write status updates for any old incident. You're going to write it for a big incident that has a lot of people involved and sort of spans your team, which means that there's other stakeholders who have to know what's going on, who need to be informed. And so in that situation, it's like an extra level of stress, right? And there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of things going on. And so that first update can often be the hardest one. First of all, you have to remember to do it. And then you have to sort of like frame what you know, which is usually not that much at the beginning, right?
Right.
And then there's sort of this like life cycle to status updates. And this is something that we sort of like really refined as we worked on this, right? So if you think about, and I think Everaldo could talk a little bit about this in a minute, but there's sort of like different phases of an incident when it comes to status updates. So the first phase is the like fog of war. What's even going on? We're looking at it. We'll give you an update. People are engaged. Like we're on it, right? That's kind of the message, right? And then it kind of progresses to like, hey, we think it might be in this area, or we're investigating these contributing factors. Then it kind of advances, and that may take a while, right? There might be like because you also want to keep your stakeholders in like abreast of what's going on. And that can include updates that are not new information. There are things like, hey, we continue to look at this incident related to XYZ. We're going to provide another update in a few minutes, right? And then finally, you get to zeroing in on the cause, maybe the remediation process, and then finally resolution. And all of those can have a little bit of a different flavor.
Okay. And then, you brought up something that looking at some of the things that large language models are good at. You talked about how these progressive stages of an incident and the different types of status updates that come into them, like they build on like pre-existing information. And I forget the term where it's, the being able to kind of recall and remember and retain context is something that's really powerful with LLMs that just hasn't been available in sort of other natural language processing models in the past. So this is where, sanity check that description, Everaldo, because like I'm just trying to put this in the layperson's terms. But is that ability to like kind of follow along something that was, like made this something that was like, this is a feature we can now build that we couldn't build before?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing that is also kind of a game changer in terms of LLMs is just the interface between your product and that type of model. Right? It's very simple. You can interact with it through prompts, which are very much like a conversation that you're having with this oracle, and it makes it a little unique in how you can interact with it. And another thing, based on what Lior was mentioning, that we see a lot is as you are in the middle of solving an incident and you may run into a writer's block. Me as a English as a second language person, I have that even more strong of a response at times, right? So having this technology that can help you just gather data from different sources and generate a summary while making sure that I am in the loop and having a chance to review what's being sent to my stakeholders is definitely something that we didn't have available at our disposal even just a year ago. which we can now do just because of what LLMs make possible. It's not as simple as just asking questions, and I'm sure we'll get to some of the complexity of what the teams are implementing here. But it's definitely really exciting to have this sort of technology available.
Yeah. So, I just think that's so fun, right? When you're thinking about like, that's just so fun. Like this was something that wasn't available a year ago, right? And then fast forward, here we are. We're now, uncovering this entire new, like, sure, a problem that's always been there. There's always been that kind of tyranny of the blank status update. That it's just how do I even get like a draft going? It's always been there. Now we've got something new at our disposal. So how did you kind of go about wrangling this sort of new technology available, in order to put it to use?
Maybe I can. What's interesting from the product side, or from the customer, from the user side, we all got this amazing technology, ChatGPT, let's say 6-7 months ago, and I'm running here a user group of marketing people who use it, and they explained it so nice. They say there are 3 phases when you start with a product like ChatGPT as a normal user. The first one is you're excited. You put in your first question and you say, "Wow, that's magic. That's mind blowing." Okay. Then the second phase is that you are at one point where you say, "Oh, it doesn't fit 100% my use case." You're always giving up. And then the third one is that you actually realize, "Oh, I have to train the machine, or I have to talk different to the machine." So you start improving your prompts. And I think ChatGPT, 100 million users used it already. And I'm questioning how many of these people actually went to stage number 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are 1. Then there are a lot of people who haven't tried it yet. People actually get pretty easy then to stage 2, but really to this point, like, "Oh, I'm getting a master in writing prompts. I know how to talk to this machine to get the best output." And that's the typical experience you have with a ChatGPT, which is a text box, and you can answer every question. What we tried with our product was like, we have good AI people in our team, right? They are experts in writing prompts and the things. And we bring it down to 1 click for the specific use case. And the person can see this magic, the user sees this magic with 1 click, and doesn't have to go to the frustration, doesn't have to learn prompt engineering and modifying this. So that comes all out of the box because we are focusing on this one use case. That's interesting to see the users, how they use ChatGPT today. Yeah.
And I think an interesting segue from that too is like on our end, behind the scenes, one thing that's interesting is that as a whole, PagerDuty offers a lot of flexibility to our clients. And as a result of that, people interact with the product a variety of different ways, which results on different data being captured. Your experience may be a little bit different than Ben's experience if you're part of 2 different organizations. And we want to make sure that when we implement a feature like this, that both of you have equally positive interactions with this, right? But behind the scenes, the way we implement that experience can be a little bit different because your data is different from Ben's data, which translates to potentially a prompt that might work perfectly well for you may not work as well for Ben. So as Ben mentioned, one thing that we're doing behind the scenes is kind of taking that work away from you and running a lot of experiments to figure out what's the best way to make sure that this application works well for the largest possible number of customers, while also making sure that they all have an equally good experience, despite the fact that they may be using the product slightly differently, and leveraging the flexibility that we offer. And we've had a lot of experience with that, since we have shipped a number of other AI features that had the same challenges in making sure that we can deal with different types of data, different ways that different clients interact with the product, while offering the same kind of functionality to everyone. So it's definitely been exciting to work on that.
Yeah, so, I guess when I first kind of started trying to dig into this and wrap my head around it, I I understood the idea of, ooh, yeah, you don't really want someone in the heat of an incident who's trying to get help generating that, just even a draft of a status update. Like, you don't want them having to kind of go through that prompt engineering, iterative prompt engineering. Like, who has time for that? And that sort of pre-engineering those prompts, if you will, is valuable, and you like wrapping that with the kind of, here's just the button and we'll generate it for you. But what you're describing, Emeraldo, is that like even there, it's not necessarily like, hey, we've pre-designed these prompts and they're going to work for everybody. Like, it sounds like there's even more nuance in there, but it's still all sort of abstracted away from the user with that kind of, hey, just click to generate. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, and there's even one other twist to that story, which is you can press the button with the same data and get different answers, right? Because LLMs, they don't necessarily produce predictable output every time. And so that's another interesting constraint that kind of comes into the prompt engineering story, because you may want to, and in fact, this is something that we need to do, is we need to constrain the output sometimes. And sort of, so it's not just about saying, hey, here's some data, please construct an update. You also have to sort of like constrain the answer and provide, like, here's one example. So let's say you're providing a status update. You don't want to mention people by name, because that's not something you'd ever do, right? Like it's almost like there's the things that are intuitive to a person writing an update that you can't assume are intuitive in this case. Like, let's say that and we'll probably get into the data sources and stuff in a little bit, but let's say you pass a timeline in that says Bob did this at 2:05 and then Alice did this at 2:06. Then like it might say, yeah, the update is Bob did this. And it's like, that's not an update you'd want to send to a stakeholder, right? So that's just one example of how, updates are primarily summary in nature. Like, here's where we are, but details also matter, but it depends what the detail is, right? Like the detail about what, if we're zeroing in on a potential cause, may be very relevant to the update, but who did it, maybe a very particular aspect of what they did, maybe not so much. Maybe that's TMI, right? So that's, it's, very much art and science.
Yeah, and you're touching on something that I remember you bringing up when we were working on that article for the New Stack on this topic, about how, what you're describing is how it's really important when you're trying to, hey, we'll abstract away all the prompt engineering messiness and the iterations to get there, but you're also like, and we're going to embed some best practices that, like what you describe about, you don't mention that it was Bob who did this and Alice who did that, but best practices would be, you wouldn't do that, but it doesn't mean that there aren't people out there who do that right now, right? And it's just, they're constantly name dropping in their status updates. Like, the PagerDuty lets you do that, right? But here, what I'm hearing you say is like, actually the best practice is not to do that. And it's kind of a distraction. Focus on the events. But like, we have this opportunity to actually take those best practices and kind of blend them into all the prompt engineering that's much more about how to get, produce that output. Is that fair? Like, to kind of say we're wiring in the best practices?
100%. And I would say that's what's really interesting about this, is that there's an opportunity to sort of, there's two kind of areas of opportunity. One is, of course, the like prompt engineering side of it. And then the other side is like, and the years of sort of knowing our data, working with our data. But then the other part is just that implicit like best practices of how to do this. And this comes up with other, features that we're working on as well. Like, for example, with postmortems, right? Where there are good and not so good ways to approach these things. And they're not obvious because, if I look at, for example, the evolution of our, incident response process, even within PagerDuty, it's evolved over the years. And there's something that we did for like a while, and then we're like, you know what? Maybe that isn't the best thing. Maybe we should do this instead. And that builds up and it accumulates over years, and you refine and you refine and you refine. And then with some of them, you don't even realize that you do them anymore. And then when you're developing a product like this, you actually have to go, no, wait a minute. Actually, I'm going to go read our docs and see what we wrote, because there might be something in there that I just wouldn't have even realized is something that we needed to write down. So that is kind of like baked into these prompts. So it's not just that we're saving the user time because we know, hey, this data is like valuable in this context, but also here's the right way to craft this. And those two things are coming together: the knowledge of the data and the process refinement and knowledge.
Yeah. And just speaking of those best practices, I'm going to just drop in to share with folks the ops guides that PagerDuty has. So Leo, you're sort of alluding to some of these in terms of, we have publicly shared, and I believe these are actually, they're open source. You can pull, and make pull requests into GitHub where they're hosted. And there's guides for postmortems, for kind of that stakeholder communication. So a lot of the things that we're talking about here, but these have always been sort of written down as something to refer to and try to practice and internalize. And now, they're actually kind of getting wired in to the product itself in the form of these types of features, which I think is really exciting. So just wanted to share those for folks, because there's a lot of really great content there for folks. I want to sort of shift a little bit and start to ask about the data, right? So we've been kind of talking about, some of the like, hey, what's the problem to solve? Like, how do we think about, what are we trying to, get as output? What are some of the challenges? But let's talk about the actual data sources. You talked about feeding in a timeline. We've talked about how there's a lot of conversations in Slack. Everaldo, I'll point your way, since you've got kind of a lot of the data science influence here. Like, what were some of the discoveries that were made about the data sources that need to get used or excluded, and how?
Yeah, so I think you kind of covered the data sources that we found to be the most useful initially. So as people are responding to incidents, like naturally they're going to be having conversations with one another. That can, for a lot of our clients and ourselves, like that tends to happen on Slack channels. And just parsing through those messages that engineers may be sending to each other, we can aggregate that information and use as input to some of these prompts. And that tends to have a lot of really rich information that we can use to summarize the incident up to a certain timestamp. We also have been looking into extracting data from incident notes. So you can, in the PagerDuty UI itself, add some notes as the incident is ongoing. And there's a pretty simple interface that you can use today to just drop some notes through the UI itself. That is actually what we are starting with, and we have identified um, uh, uh, a few accounts and a few use cases where the data that we extract from that specific source is actually quite good at for this particular application. There are also timeline updates, some of which are more automated. So some integrations may produce some data that also helps you see what's been happening on that incident up to a certain point. And we are also extracting that information and bundling it into the input we send to these LLM models to get as rich as possible of a summary. And that goes back to the point I was making earlier. With the flexibility that we offer to customers, people will use our products slightly differently. It may be the case that some people don't use Slack as much. They tend to take notes in the UI because that's easier for them. That's what they're used to doing. And in some other cases, they may be very heavy Slack users and not use the UI for that purpose at all. So we are trying to make sure that we are broadly looking at all of these different data sources and using them to the best of their um, capabilities. And if you're using all of them, then the prompts behind the scenes may actually be using all of them. If you're just using one, then we are still going to be able to support some of that functionality. Yeah, and Ben, you may have a few other notes to add.
Yeah, for us, the question is, where does the communication happens, right? Is it on Notes? Is it in Slack? Is it in MS Team? We looked also on, for example, Jira tickets, also where the developer lives and comments back and forth. So our architecture and how we build it, we want to be very flexible, because one customer is using this for communication and the other one that tool for communication. And in the future, we believe that we should be also flexible to switch out the sources. Goes all back to this big data quote, right? These garbage in, garbage out. And that's also the problem we have here with AI, not just big data analytics, but today also with AI. We need good data to have good output, right? If there's no conversation about this incident, for example, in the Slack channel, then we can't produce a good update. So, and for us, it's really now we're in the stage to figure out, hey, where are these channels? And we are talking to customers to figure out if it's the right channel for this customer, and try to find the best data source. But the good thing is this communication happens. So we just have to figure out where it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's something else that I don't mean to throw any like wild curveballs here, but something else that I've been learning a little bit about and trying to wrap my head around that makes sense here is just the notion of kind of like recency of the data and how, like, what challenges that introduces. Because, a lot of folks, if you've used ChatGPT, you know that it's been trained up to data like up to, I can't remember, like, 18 months ago or 2021, something like that. But it's, that's useful for certain things, but there's all kinds of problems and challenges and things that it's like, that's, if you're talking about like, I want to talk about what's new, it's not there. And when you talk about an incident underway, and that is like the newest of the new, right? Like, this is not even talking about like, hey, can it be updated for, yesterday's earnings report or whatever it is. You're talking about like, no, what happened in the last, few minutes. So, can you talk a little bit about like, what are some of those design choices and explorations to think about how to handle that recency?
Yeah, I could jump in and take that to start. So I think it's pretty interesting. Like there's recency of, I think in the, consumer space, the thing you're referring to is like ChatGPT is only trained up to, I don't know, let's say September 2021 or something like that, right? And so you can ask it like, current events, right? But that's based on how it's trained, right? And so in our case, it's actually a little different because we are feeding it the recent events, right? So there's the things that it already knows that it can use to perform a task for you. But then there's the things you tell it, right? And so we are, one of the benefits of this is it's real time, right? So if you press the generate button for status updates, we will pull the activity on that incident right up until that point. So that is like live data, right? And that goes into that prompt that we send. So, we craft this prompt and here is the data up till this point. And that sort of represents the kind of summarization task. And if you want to dig one level deeper there and nerd out on like, well, wait a minute, could there be technologies that have come out since like September 2021 that like the LLM might need to have context on or something too? And I would say in our testing, that's not something we've seen. But in theory, that could be a thing. But I think what we've seen the LLMs be really good at, and Everaldo can also chime in here, is they're very good at summarizing things, right? With data you give them. And, if you're giving them context about something that it hasn't heard of, it can still kind of paraphrase, right? But I think the key is that, you are providing the data, in that situation.
Yeah. And that's interesting about, yeah, like there is that potential for filling in more context in other ways, but that's not entirely needed in what you've seen so far. Well, just wanted to kind of go around and give some opportunity for any kind of closing thoughts in terms of, you know, what has you excited about sort of like digging in, and where do you want to take this next, or any just sort of final parting thoughts. I'll go to you first, Everaldo.
Yeah, so I mean, my entire team is really excited to work on this kind of problem. It's something that wasn't available to us last year. It's in the data science realm, so you're all data science nerds here for the most part. So it's interesting to see the field is evolving really rapidly. To every day there's an update to GPT or a new open source model that does something slightly differently. So that there's a lot of ground for us to cover. But what gets me really excited is that this isn't our first rodeo. PagerDuty actually has a number of AI features in the product today, with a lot of thought that was put behind all of them, like both in terms of figuring out how to properly embed this feature into the product, make sure that it works well for a large number of clients, make sure that it is removing toil in a way that's really tangible. And so we are reusing a lot of that experience, and it's a little bit different from maybe what other competing tools are doing now, just kind of starting from the LLM universe and building from there. So I think we have a bit of experience that makes our approach to how we are embedding this technology a little unique. And I've been pretty excited to kind of partner with new teams as well. I didn't even know Lior a few weeks ago, and we're best friends now. Ben is my second best friend. So I'm excited to partner with different teams and work on interesting models.
I hate to say it, but Ben, I think your tea preference may have like influenced Everaldo's stack ranking of this friendship circle here. So
No comments.
Yeah, well, it's very cool. And I also really love just like the empathy for the user that is clearly being brought into this. And to your point, Everaldo, about the experience that PagerDuty has with our other AI features, where a lot of this is being used in very intense sort of situations, and how to make it as sort of streamlined as possible. But again, to your point, also honoring the flexibility that people have, so many different integrations and sources of data, and chat tools available that people are using. So that empathy for our users is really coming through. Ben, I'm going to come around to you, Everaldo's second best friend. What are you excited about?
I think it's a shift in the technology world, right? We had big shifts before, like the browser, mobile, and things like this. And this is a big shift in the industry. And that will be also disruptive. And that's fun to be part of this. And everything is evolving so quickly. But we see also at PagerDuty, with our first features, which we built with this new technology, we can also deliver pretty quick new features based on this, because we can easily use models from different vendors, or have an own model. We don't have to build everything from scratch anymore. Though also our development just speeds up, and that's an exciting time.
Absolutely. And one thing, just while you mentioned, how quickly the team is working on delivering these features, I just thought I'd also share in the chat, if I can remember how to use my new keyboard. There we are. It's Command V to paste things. So just putting in the chat for folks, the wait list, which includes tick boxes for several different capabilities that we've started to talk about at the beginning of the month. But this is a place to go in and, indicate like, hey, yeah, I'm interested. I want to hear more about this. I want to get invited into, early access programs. You may have someone from the product team like Ben or another product manager reach out to follow up, but feel free to fill out that form if you're hearing about this and you're interested. All right, last but not least, Lior, what are you excited about?
Yeah, I would say I am most excited to see how customers use it and the feedback that we get. So we've already started to get some early feedback, and it's sort of like exciting and rewarding to hear it. And I think the one thing that very early on in this process that I would tell my engineers is, hey, suspend disbelief, right? Because some of the early tests like did not yield good results. Like we were trying some data that we thought, hey, maybe this will work well, and it like didn't work well. And so sometimes you can go through this process where you're like, is this really going to be that good? And it's really important to, and then obviously as we started to dig into different data sources, we got far better results. But even in the sort of early feedback from users, we noticed that you'll get these examples where, maybe someone will be like, this update wasn't so great. But then you'll get these other examples that are like, wow, I can't believe it figured that out, that it like knew that thing in that incident. And those are really cool to see. And, I think a thing that is really important is it's almost like you don't want to, I talked a little bit before about kind of constraining the outputs, but you don't want to constrain things too much because, the way I like to put it is you don't want to cap the upside. Like it can really impress you, right? And it can do something really cool. And, I love when those things shine through and the thing like exceeds customer expectations, right? It's like, wow, it did that. Holy moly. So that's really fun. I'm really looking forward to continuing to iterate on this because in a lot of ways, the iteration is the refinement and what we learn. That's really gratifying, and I'm looking forward to continuing to iterate on it and make it better and better.
Well, awesome, and I look forward to working with this lot as well to just continue to tell that story and share some of these useful insights, not only for PagerDuty users, but just the rest of the community that is also looking at how do we wrangle these technologies and ultimately build something that's useful, not solutions in search of problems. I'll just share one more thing in the chat before we sign off. Another resource. This is the article we published on the new stack recently that has a lot of the insights from this team, and that's a great kind of companion piece to this conversation from today. So before I sign off, there is one last housekeeping item that I just realized I have not pulled up here, which is our upcoming episodes. Just bear with me one moment. Oops, I don't do it that way. I do it this way. Our upcoming episodes, let's see, we've got we're right now we're on with Lior, Ben, and Everaldo. We've got a little bit of a break next week for the holiday here in the US, but then we're going to be back with Sriram Subramanian from Microsoft talking about responsible generative AI. Again, some great insights from someone in the community. Then on July 17th, we'll have James Urquhart from VMware, who's you may have come across his O'Reilly book on flow architectures. And so there's just some interesting ideas that I wanted to pick his brain about after hearing him give a talk recently. And not actually on this list yet. I need to update my green Jello slide here. Is July 24th, we'll be back with Heath Newborn from our team here at PagerDuty, digging in a little bit to AI ops. And so stay tuned for that. We'll look forward to having you back. Lior, Everaldo, Ben, thank you all for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Domain.
Thanks, everyone.